Just days after the events in Venezuela, President Trump hinted at new targets.
Cuba is, not doing very well right now. That system has not been a very good one for Cuba, and we want to help the people in Cuba.
A day later, it was Colombia.
Colombia is very sick too, and he's not going to be doing it very long.
没有哪个国家可以充当国际警察，没有哪个国家可以自诩为国际法官。
The unpredictability of Donald Trump and where his team is going to go next is something that is incredibly destabilizing and at the same time of an enormous amount of concern. We are just a couple of weeks into this new era in the post-Venezuela era. So countries are scrambling to figure out how do they respond, how do they form coalitions, how do they engage China, how do they balance. One of the things that we've been hearing throughout Southeast Asia, especially in countries like Indonesia, is how this attack in Venezuela that came after U.S. support for Israel in Gaza has just cratered U.S. public opinion in these developing countries. I am just blown away by what I see from key stakeholders across the global South, and even to some extent in G7 countries, about the fall of U.S. credibility and the fall of faith in the U.S. as a stable partner and as a force for good in the world. It is remarkable how fast this has fallen, and I think a lot of developing countries are really struggling. Let's be very clear here that they're not necessarily looking to China as the answer either. Many people have this binary, it's either the U.S. or it's China. China is not always the answer in response to the U.S.
Cuba is one of 5 communist countries in the world and a longtime friend of China. In Havana, the vintage cars on the road are a sign of just how much the Cuban economy has suffered under American sanctions. The United States placed sanctions on Cuba in 1962, following Cuba's nationalization of American-owned oil refineries without compensation. Many of those sanctions remain in place today, over 6 decades later. Chinese New Year 2025. Cubans and members of the local Chinese community share in the festivities. China has consistently been one of Cuba's top 3 trading partners. China imports mainly minerals, seafood, tobacco, pharmaceuticals, and alcohol from Cuba, while Cuba imports primarily electrical equipment, machinery, vehicles, steel, and plastics from China. Chinese companies have also invested in areas like clean energy and biopharma. Cuba, the target of several failed U.S. attempts at regime change, is now back in Washington's crosshairs.
Cuba is going to be something we'll end up talking about because Cuba is a failing nation right now, very badly failing nation, and we want to help the people. It's very similar in the sense that we want to help the people in Cuba, but we want to also help the people that were forced out of Cuba and living in this country. Do you want to say something about that, Marco, please?
Secretary of State Marco Rubio, whose parents left Cuba for the U.S., puts Havana on notice.
Suffice it to say, Cuba is a disaster.
The United States embargo and sanctions against Cuba has been long-lasting for more than 6 decades, and Cuba is still standing very proudly as an independent country. Now, if President Trump wants to order his military in an invasion against Cuba, first of all, even if they win a technical success, strategically it will be a complete failure, because the United States will demonstrate to the whole world that they will be taking action as a country of aggression, launching an illegal, unjustified invasion. No one can really foretell what will be the outcome of such military invasion by the United States against Cuba. The United States actually tried several times over the past 6 decades or so and failed miserably. The former President Castro has survived all the attempted assassination, and I hope the Cuban government and the military will also be very well prepared in deal with any kind of encouraging invasion, aggression from the United States against Cuba.
The Cuban president was the only Latin American head of state who attended China's Victory Day parade in 2025. While there is no official arms trade between the countries, the U.S. claims that China has been implicated in illicit weapons transfers to Cuba. It also claims that Cuba is being used as a spy base for China.
To accuse Cuban-China relations and to pin that down as if it is a spy operation, it is completely unjustified. It means that the United States is running for an excuse, possibly to launch an aggression of Cuba.
Unease is growing in Cuba following the threat from Trump. The Cuban economy long depended on subsidized oil from Venezuela, which is now gone. Some in Havana look toward support from a close ally, China.
No hay duda que para Cuba es un peligro y que es una amenaza permanente no tener el apoyo venezolano. Pero, por el otro lado, hay una reacción tal de otras fuentes que van a salir en apoyo de Cuba, porque además Cuba es el próximo. Y ahí yo contaría en primer lugar con China. Hay una información confirmada que hay un enviado chino en La Habana mandado desde ayer de Beijing para acá. La posición rusa.
中方坚定支持地区国家维护拉美和加勒比和平区地位，愿同地区国家和国际社会一道，共同维护拉美和加勒比地区的和平与稳定。没有哪个国家可以充当国际警察，没有哪个国家可以自诩为国际法官。我们愿意同各国共同捍卫国际法权威，反对从零法者，反对干涉内政。
Will China provide security assistance to Cuba?
Well, I think China will do whatever we can to support the sovereignty and the territorial integrity of Cuba and the well-being of the Cuban people. After all, we have been dealing with each other as brothers and sisters for decades. Now, if I read and listen very carefully to what President Trump has said in recent days about Cuba, he wants to maximize the embargo against Cuba, cutting off any supply of oil or gas to Cuba, cutting off financial flow to Cuba, try to suffocate Cuba, to create chaos in Cuba, and to trigger color revolution or regime change. The Cuban government and the Cuban people can survive the maximum bullying because they have been dealing with such maximum bullying from the United States for decades, and they've come up with their own survival methodology.
There are people in Latin America now asking how China's global security initiative can protect them in real-world scenarios. What is your response?
In terms of the overall military capacities, the Chinese PLA is a complete match against the US military. In some crucial aspects, the Chinese military capabilities are even far exceeding that of the United States. Therefore, the United States should not indulge in any fantasy that in terms of a war, conventional or non-conventional war, the United States can overwhelm China without suffering devastating consequences. That being the case, I would say, at this particular moment, I don't think China wants to use military capabilities against the United States. Maybe this is the better time to see how the United States will fully expose itself as to its true color, as to how much of a greater depth it can plunge into in terms of accelerating the demise of Pax Americana. How much they want to do to make sure that everyone in the world, the Danes, for example, the Europeans, the Italians, you name it, or even the British or the Canadians, who have become convinced that their southern neighbor is not their true friend, and they can see the United States in the true color.
Now that we look at Cuba in its moment of greatest need, if you like, with the prospect that its oil which has been its lifeline from Venezuela for the last 20 years will now end completely as the US exerts its control over the Venezuelan oil industry, and that Russia, another of its lifelines, is too preoccupied with the war in Ukraine to give great aid, then who is going to come to Cuba's rescue at this moment. I'm not sure China is going to go out on a limb to save the government in Havana. China would risk stoking tensions with Washington were it to play its cards in Cuba and provide considerable aid or investment or emergency fuel reserves.
Speaking to reporters on his plane after the Venezuela operation, President Trump hinted Colombia could also be next.
Colombia is very sick, too, run by a sick man who likes making cocaine and selling it to the United States. And he's not going to be doing it very long, let me tell you.
What does that mean? He's not going to be doing it very long?
He's not doing it very long. He has cocaine mills and cocaine factories. He's not going to be doing it very long.
So there will be an operation by the U.S. and
it sounds good to me.
Colombians poured into the street to protest the threat. Colombia is the fourth largest economy in Latin America in 2025. Historically, Colombia has been Washington's closest ally in the region. But President Petro, who was elected on a left-wing platform in 2022, has emerged as one of Trump's fiercest critics. China is now Colombia's second-largest trading partner after the United States. China has also invested heavily in Colombia with infrastructure projects and mining operations. Significant projects include the Ituango hydropower plant, invested by the Power Construction Corporation of China. It is the largest installed hydropower station under construction in the Americas and will solve 18% of Colombia's electricity demand once finished. Chinese companies are also involved in the building of the metro system in the capital, Bogota. When leaders of the two countries met, President Xi said the two sides can further expand cooperation in fields such as wind power, new energy vehicles, digital economy, and artificial intelligence.
Es lo que te estoy diciendo. Ya esa posición de ser paria y de estar de segundón detrás de los Estados Unidos creo que queda en el pasado. Y hay que mirar a ambos lados. No dejo de mirar a Estados Unidos, que es importante. Miramos al sur de nuestro continente y a los dos lados, y eso significa el mundo. La transformación de Colombia está abierta al mundo.
The decline in US-Colombian relations is an extraordinary thing to watch. We are looking at the deterioration of the alliance, which is perhaps the strongest that the United States has had in South America for the last few decades, rooted obviously in extraordinary US support for the fight against drug trafficking, for the fight against guerrillas, best expressed in Plan Colombia, through which the United States donated something in the region of $12 billion in largely military support for the Colombian government. The United States it has partnerships in prosecution services, police forces, military services, military forces. It has a huge embassy in Bogota, and yet at the moment you would say that there are few worse political relationships than the United States and Trump's ties with Gustavo Petro, the left-wing leader of Colombia at the moment. I think China has watched this deterioration with a degree of curiosity, amusement, and a sense that here is an opportunity which it should not miss. There was an interesting interview last year with the Chinese ambassador to Colombia, who pointed out that within Chinese political circles, Trump was known as comrade because he was doing so much to China's benefit.
This is the best moment for China, because China, without firing a single shot, has made it believable for everyone in the world that the United States is not a real defender of freedom, a defender of peace, a defender of sovereignty and territorial integrity of other countries.